In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you why Twinblades are the best weapon in Elden Ring. This is the fourth video in our series where we go through each weapon type and take a look at each weapon inside that weapon type, sort of go through their moveset and explain why you may or may not want to use it in your build. Hopefully you've caught on by now that the title of these videos is satire due to all the clickbait videos out there, and really we're just showcasing information about these weapons and showing that every weapon in Elden Ring can be used if you know how to use it properly. Before we get into the Twinblades themselves, however, I want to talk about Twinblades in general and the playstyles of Twinblades. Usually there's pretty much two setups you're going to use with a Twinblade. You're either going to two-hand a Twinblade in order to get the moveset of two-handing Twinblades, or you're going to dual-wield Twinblades in order to hit rapidly with jump attacks. You don't typically see people one-handing Twinblades with a Spellblade build or one-handing them with his shield, because really the strength of the Twinblade is the fact that it can hit rapidly when two-handing or hit rapidly when dual-wielding. Of these two playstyles, I think that you'll see the dual-wielding of Twinblades far more often than a single Twinblade, and that's because of the 4 hits on jump attack, not unlike curved swords. And what's really interesting about Twinblades is they actually have better status effect build-up than curved swords, so you get that rapid strikes like you would with curved swords, but you get even more build-up when doing that, which makes them more effective at applying statuses if you're using a jump attack sort of combo. And then the other one is simply two-handing a Twinblade in order to use the moveset while two-handing, which is also very fast, but not as fast as the jump attacks from dual-wielding. And leaning into an Ash of War that you can put on this. Twinblades, by default, most of them have Spinning Slash, which is a terrible Ash of War, because Spinning Slash only accounts for basically one half of the weapon when you're using it. If you're dual-wielding when you use Spinning Slash, or you're using a weapon like Twinblades that hits with both sides, it doesn't take that into account and only uses one weapon or one side of the weapon. So you basically get the same damage you would get if you were just attacking with a regular attack. So you want to swap out Spinning Slash on your Twinblade as soon as possible if you can. Talking a little bit about the pros and cons of this weapon, it kind of sits somewhere between a greatsword and a straight sword in terms of damage. You're going to get, on average, more damage than a straight sword, but less than a greatsword with similar setups. And it also allows for status effect build-up faster than just about any weapon type in the game. As I mentioned, the jump attack of the dual wield hits 4 times rapidly, and it has better status effect build-up. So if you're playing a status effect build-up setup, then dual wielding is not a bad way to go. The cons of this weapon type are that 5 of the 6 Twinblades aren't found earlier than Altus Plateau, which means you're going to be stuck with a regular Twinblade for a large section of the game, and you won't be able to acquire a second one until much, much further. And on top of that, none of these Twinblades can you get 2 of without getting another player to drop one to you or going into NG+, because none of them drop from enemies, so none of them are farmable. Also, another thing I want to mention is that when you're using the two-handed moveset of this weapon, even though it hits twice rapidly with each swing, that first hit only does about 1/3 of the damage that the second hit does, so you're not getting 2 full hits of damage, which would make this obviously a lot stronger than it could be, and is why it's better for a status effect build, because even though that hit is only 1/3 of the damage, you're still getting that extra status effect buildup. Moving along to the unique Twinblades, the first one is Gargoyle's Black Blades. Gargoyle's Black Blade shares the default moveset of many other Twinblades and deals physical and holy damage. It's the heaviest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 8.5, and requires some points in strength, dexterity, and faith in order to use. The pros of this weapon are that it has exceptionally high damage at minimum requirements. It has the highest attack rating of all Twinblades. It makes great use of talismans like Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. The cons are that it has poor faith scaling. It's found very far into the game by defeating the Blackblade Kindred in Mountaintops of the Giants. You cannot change the Ash of War on this weapon, and Spinning Slash does not hit with both ends of the weapon, making it deal about the same damage, more or less, as a normal attack. Holy damage is resisted by some of the toughest bosses in Elden Ring, and it has the worst strength scaling compared against heavy infused Twinblades by nearly 100 damage. Conclusion: although Gargoyle's Black Blades has the highest damage of all Twinblades, it does both physical and holy damage. Holy damage is arguably one of the worst damage types late game in Elden Ring, because some of the hardest bosses resist it. Additionally, Spinning Slash does not take advantage of both ends of this weapon, making it a terrible weapon skill on a Twinblade. The damage dealt by Spinning Slash will be the same or less than regular attacks, and those don't cost FP. Because you cannot change this weapon's skill on the Gargoyle's Black Blades, you'll essentially be playing without a weapon skill if you use this weapon in your main hand, unless you one-hand it. The Gargoyle's Black Blades have terrible faith scaling, making 80 strength the optimal stat spread for this weapon, with minimum requirements in dexterity and faith. You'd think two-handing this weapon would increase your damage significantly because of this, but it really doesn't, boosting it by a mere 27 damage. This puts this weapon in a terrible place because two-handing doesn't boost damage much and also sticks you with a crappy weapon skill if you do. If you dual wield, you'll need to boost strength to get the most damage out of it, so whichever Twinblade you pair it with will also need strength scaling, but neither weapon will gain the extra damage from strength because you aren't two-handing. If you insist on using this weapon, I'd actually one-hand it and treat it as a regular sword and pair it with a great shield since you already have high strength anyways. This will allow you to block counter and use spinning slash when needed. It's certainly not ideal to use a Twinblade this way, but 700 attack rating is great sword levels of damage on a weapon that swings faster. Next up we have Eleonora's Poleblade. Eleonora's Poleblade has a unique R2 that increases in rotation if it's charged and deals physical and fire damage. It is the lightest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 6, and requires some points in strength, dexterity, and arcane in order to wield. The pros of this weapon are that it causes bleed buildup on each hit. It has a fantastic weapon skill in Bloodblade Dance. It benefits well from Flame Grant Me Strength since it deals both physical and fire damage. It makes great use of talismans like Winged and Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack Tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. And finally, it's the lightest Twinblade in the game. The downsides of this weapon are that it's found a ways into the game and Altus Plateau, and that it has split damage that isn't ideal for enemies that resist fire damage. Conclusion: Eleonora's Poleblade is arguably the most powerful Twinblade when used alone. Between its native bleed buildup on every hit and its weapon skill Bloodblade Dance that not only hits rapidly but often staggers enemies, it's one of the deadliest weapons in Elden Ring. Its damage is in the middle bottom of the pack when it comes to Twinblades, but it has far more damage than any Twinblade set to the bleed affinity. Because this weapon scales with dexterity and arcane, you can pair it with the Dragon Communion Seal quite well, allowing for a hybrid sort of build that also casts some spells. You won't have a ton of points to invest in Faith, but you should have enough for dragon spells and some buffs. This is great because you can use talismans that boost your attack power on successive hits like Winged Sword Insignia, and then cast spells for increased damage, similar to the Dragon Warrior build I made, just with this weapon instead of curved swords. The sweet spot for this weapon is about 50 dexterity and 50 arcane, with arcane further increasing your bleed buildup. You'll be able to increase the damage of this weapon on into an NG+, making it viable for successive playthroughs, particularly because bleed damage is based off the max health of enemies. Because Bloodblade Dance is so deadly, I'd either use this weapon two-handed and lean into its weapon skill, or pair it with the Dragon Communion Seal for some spell casting. Remember that weapon skills do not take into account your offhand when using them, so there's really no reason to dual wield if you're spamming Bloodblade Dance. However, if you pair it with an occult-infused Godskin Peeler in your main hand that uses Seppuku, you'll have insane damage and bleed buildup with jump attacks. Moving along to the non-unique Twinblades, the first up is the Twinblade itself. The Twinblade shares the default moveset of many other Twinblades and deals physical damage. It's the second lightest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 7, and requires some points in strength and dexterity in order to wield. The pros of this weapon are that it can be found at the beginning of the game in the Dragon Burnt Runes and Limgrave. You can use many different Ashes of War and can change the affinity. It's not that far behind in damage compared to the Twin Knight Swords and Godskin Peeler, which are found much later. It makes great use of talismans like Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack Tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. The major downside of this weapon is that it has the lowest damage at nearly every infusion compared to all other Twinblades. Conclusion: really the only reason to use the Twinblade is because you can get it so early in the game, but otherwise it falls behind all other Twinblades in nearly every infusion. However, it's not so far behind Twin Knight Swords and Godskin Peeler that you need to replace it once you have these, especially if you've already upgraded it and are short on materials. I'd wait to swap it with Gargoyle's Twinblade once you get it, since that has significantly more damage. You'll gain the most damage from the Fire and Lightning infusions, then with Magic coming second and Sacred and Flame Arts landing at third. If you're two-handing it, Heavy comes in a solid fourth place, with all their infusions much further behind. However, as I mentioned earlier, Twinblades are particularly good at setting status effects, so the Cold Infusion is not a bad option as it outperforms Keen, Occult, Quality, and Blood and Poison in terms of total attack rating. Because you won't have access to another Twinblade weapon for some time, you'll likely two-hand this weapon until you get another one, or just use it as a regular sword with a shield until you acquire Twin Knight Swords or Godskin Peeler. I highly recommend going with the Cold or Bleed infusions if you're two-handing for status effect buildup, or going with Lightning or Fire if you're one-handing it with a shield. The Twinblade leans towards the dexterity side of things scaling-wise, which makes it better suited to a dual-wield build than two-handing, because you don't gain extra damage when two-handing from the dexterity stat like you do with strength. For this reason, you should pair it with Godskin Peeler, which also has better dexterity scaling than strength once you have it, and probably replace it with Gargoyle's Twinblade or Twin Knight Sword eventually. Up next is the Twin Knight Swords. The Twin Knight Swords shares the default moveset of many other Twinblades and deals physical damage. It's the second heaviest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 8, and requires some points in strength and dexterity in order to wield. The pros of this weapon are that it has the longest length of all Twinblades by a very small amount. It can use many Ashes of War and can change affinity. It makes great use of talismans like Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, and Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. The cons of this weapon are that it's found ways into the game in Altus Plateau. It does less damage than the Gargoyle's Twinblade in the majority of cases, and Godskin Peeler in some cases. Conclusion. Twin Knight Swords is a very well-rounded Twinblade that scales better with strength and dexterity, but still outperforms the Twinblade in every case, including the Keen Infusion, though not always by much. It also has the longest reach of all Twinblades by a very small amount, though it is much longer than the Gargoyle's Twinblade, which is its biggest competition because of similar scaling. So factor this into your decision when choosing between the two of those Twinblades. Much like the Twinblade, you'll gain the most damage from the Fire and Lightning Infusion, with Magic coming in second and Sacred and Flame Arts landing at third. However, unlike the Twinblade, two-handing this weapon puts Heavy, Cold, and Blood and Poison in a much better position due to strength scaling. Heavy actually comes out second when two-handing, and Cold lands just under Sacred and Flame Art. By the time you acquire this weapon, you should have access to the Twinblade, and you should have the Godskin Peeler and Eleonora's Poleblade not long after if you don't have them already, which will allow you to dual wield if you want, though as I mentioned, strength scaling is particularly good with this weapon, and you won't gain that extra damage if you dual wield, so the choice is really up to you. Of the available Twinblades, Godskin Peeler is probably the best choice to pair it with if you're going for a bleed build setup. Otherwise, strongly consider the Heavy or Cold Infusion if you want to two-hand it for solid damage with good strength scaling. Next up, we have the Godskin Peeler. The Godskin Peeler has a unique R2 that changes when two-handing and deals physical damage. It is the second heaviest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 8, and requires some points in strength and dexterity in order to wield. The upsides to this weapon are that it has the best Keen and Occult scaling of all Twinblades. You can use many Ashes of War and can change the affinity. It makes great use of talismans like Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. The negatives are that it's found a ways into the game in Altus Plateau. In summary, the Godskin Peeler has the best Keen and Occult scaling of all Twinblades, making an ideal weapon to be dual-wielded in some sort of bleed build. When set to the Occult affinity and used with Seppuku, it has incredibly good damage as well as bleed buildup, and that's not even if you pair it with another Twinblade that can do bleed. Since bleed is less effective on regular enemies since they tend to die before it triggers, this allows you to have solid damage even when not buffed, and apply Seppuku as needed for more challenging enemies or bosses. Good choices to pair this weapon with are Eleonora's Poleblade, since it will have native bleed buildup on it, or the Twin Knight Sword set to a bleed affinity so it doesn't need to be buffed. You can even use the Gargoyle's Blood Twinblade if you wish, though it has shorter range. When set to the Occult affinity, you should crank Arcane to boost damage and to boost bleed buildup when Seppuku is used. Wear the White Mask and Lord of Blood's Exaltation for increased attack power, and slot Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, plus the Jump Attack Talisman for maximum damage output. And lastly, we come to the Gargoyle's Twinblade. The Gargoyle's Twinblade shares the default moveset of many other Twinblades and deals physical damage. It's the heaviest Twinblade in Elden Ring, weighing 8.5 and requires some points in strength and dexterity in order to wield. The pros of this weapon are that it has the best heavy scaling of all Twinblades. It has the highest attack rating at nearly every infusion. You can use many Ashes of War and can change the affinity. It makes good use of talismans like Winged Sword Insignia, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, as well as the Thorny Crack tier, which all boost damage on successive hits. The downsides are that it has the shortest length of all Twinblades. It's found far into the game by defeating the Valiant Gargoyle duo. And it's the heaviest of all Twinblades. Conclusion. The Gargoyle's Twinblade has the best all-around damage of infusible Twinblades in Elden Ring. It wins out in terms of damage in nearly every category, only losing to Godskin Peeler and Keen and Occult. The downside is that it has the shortest reach of all Twinblades by a lot, and it isn't found until much further into the game than the Twin Knight Sword, which as I mentioned before, has similar scaling. Because the Gargoyle's Twinblade leans to the strength side of things and has the best strength scaling of all Twinblades, it makes an ideal candidate for a single two-handed setup, preferably with an Ash of War that is boosted in damage by strength, such as Flame of the Red Maze. However, you don't need to use the heavy infusion with this weapon and can use Cold or Blood if you wish, since you will still have very good strength scaling with these infusions and they apply status effects. If you're going to two-hand this weapon, definitely go with Heavy, Cold, or Blood for best results, but if you want to one-hand it like a sword, which you could, the Lightning or Fire infusions will give you almost the same damage as the Gargoyle's Black Blades, and you can change your Ash of War to something better. Well, that wraps up our video on why Twinblades are the best weapon in Elden Ring. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video series. We're going to continue to put out one video a week and combined with one build if possible. If you guys have other tips that I missed about Twinblades, leave them in the comments below. But I want to know what Twinblades you guys are using in your build. Is everyone using the Godskin Peeler at cold setup, or are you using something else? Let me know in the comments below.